The age-old question. What happens when a well-known brand tries to create its own Mario Kart clone? Well, the answer is usually nothing good ever comes of it. Welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. So last week, we had South Park Rally, and oh boy, that game was not particularly good. So this week we're going to be changing it up a little bit, because for the last 12 episodes we've either had PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 racing games, so today we are heading over to the Nintendo DS for Cartoon Network Racing. So before we jump into the gameplay of it, let's give a little bit of context. So Cartoon Network Racing released in December 2006 in the US and February 2007 here in the UK and the rest of Europe. It released on two different platforms, of course the Nintendo DS and then the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 version was handled by Eutechnyx, who are very well known for budget racing games, and we've looked at many of their games before, and the Nintendo DS version was handled by Firebrand Games, another developer we've covered extensively on the channel. They've worked on so many different DS racing games: Trackmania DS, Ferrari Challenge Trofeo Pirelli, Cars 2, Need for Speed Nitro. I'm not even halfway through the list of games that we've actually looked at that they've covered. Anyway, it was published by the Game Factory, which is a name that should already sound incredibly tacky and cheap to you, and to be honest, having looked through their library of published games, they're pretty much mostly known for publishing Bratz, Garfield, and Postman Pat video games. So I hope that tells you everything you need to know about this. So before we jump into the gameplay, the first thing to do when looking at any of these games is to just take a look over at the menu design, because usually that's a pretty good pointer as to whether or not this game is going to be absolutely horrible, or at least somewhat redeeming. So this menu, honestly, colourful. I love it. It's very cartoony. Of course, this is a Cartoon Network game, so it's got that cheesy cartoon vibe to it. There's not too much going on, but there's a lot of colours, some little animations, and overall, it's actually not that bad. Firebrand Games, for the most part, are pretty decent developers when it comes to DS racing games. Not everything was a hit, and they definitely do have some duds in their library, but they have also done some really good games, so let's see how this goes. So in terms of game modes, you've got a few different things to choose from. There's your main game mode, which is Championship mode. It has 4 cups, and then 4 different speed classes. You start off with normal, and then there's an additional 3 you unlock as you progress through the game. Souped up, supered up, and flipped out. It's essentially 100cc, 150cc, and 200cc in Mario Kart terms. There's also a time trial mode, a local versus mode, and then a couple of mini-games which we will get to later. Anyway, so of course I hopped on over to the Championship mode and was greeted with a selection of 9 different characters, with an additional 11 to unlock. That's pretty impressive, to be honest. So the game features characters taken from 6 different classic Cartoon Network shows: Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Dexter's Laboratory, the Powerpuff Girls, I Am Weasel, which I'm not gonna lie I actually hadn't heard of before starting this video, and Courage the Cowardly Dog. The characters are not so evenly split between those shows, but they've all got representation here. So of course I had to choose my man Johnny Bravo to start with, and oh boy, that was certainly a choice that I made. This game honestly baits you into thinking that the track designs and stuff are going to be really boring, because the first 2 races of this cup are deadass some of the least interesting tracks I've ever played in a kart racer. The first track is called Aron City Speedway, which is a Johnny Bravo themed track, and it is just a very generic starter speedway. There's some adverts around on the track for milk, which gave me some flashbacks to The Boys. And other than that, there's not really anything notable about it, and the same goes to the second track called Death Rally, which is just a mountainous track. It's very bland to look at. It's the equivalent of just only ever eating brown foods like hash browns or chicken nuggets, stuff like that. Just very generic, boring looking food, but as a racetrack. Now, the next track is called Desert Island Dash, and this is where things did get a bit interesting, because firstly, the theming is pretty cool. Secondly, it's quite colourful, it appeals to me quite a lot. And thirdly, the layout is kind of awkward. In fact, so awkward that I managed to glitch Johnny Bravo right through a palm tree. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, perfectly sums up the collision detection in this game. I don't have anything else to say about it. Well, actually I do, that was a complete lie. But we'll get to that in a bit. So the overall controls are completely fine. You obviously use the D-pad to turn, A to go, B to brake. You can drift using the right bumper and throw items using the left bumper. The items are incredibly generic. There's an oil spill that you can put on the ground, a landmine you can put on the ground, and some rockets that you can fire, one that locks on, one that doesn't, and a blue-looking missile thing that locks onto the person in first place. Wow, I wonder where they got that idea from. Now, the car handling is fine, but the drifting is ridiculously sensitive. You only need to tap it for a split second, because otherwise you're just going to end up facing the wrong way. It gets a bit more useful in the higher speed classes when you can't make the corners as well anymore, but even then it's still ridiculously sensitive. So, more about that collision. Basically, if you touch any side of the track like a wall or a fence, it's pretty much an instant guaranteed stop. However, if an AI does that, they will just keep moving. So, yeah, that's great. Secondly, if you play as any smaller class character, and you hit a character that's larger than you, obviously you're going to bounce off, and in Mario Kart, it works quite well, but here, it just doesn't. You will sometimes just come to a complete halt if you as so much look in the direction of a larger character, and it's just such a stupid design choice, because if you don't get quick enough off the start line, you can end up just being shoved into a wall and stopped again. The whole thing is just designed in such a stupid, over-the-top way. And yes, you could argue that cartoons are meant to be over the top, but I don't think that was the design choice that Firebrand were going with. I think it's just sheer laziness. Anyway, after I got the first initial cup out of the way and the shock out of my system, I forced my way through the rest. And to be fair, there are actually some really good tracks scattered throughout. Cow and Chicken's Track and Field is a really cool school theme level with some nice little shortcuts, although again, a lot of walls to clip on. Dexter's Lab is a good track. The Wild West backlot has really cool theming, but the actual track itself is designed horribly, and there's not enough space for all the racers on the track. And you kind of find that a lot with these tracks. There's some really good themes, but really bad design in terms of the layout. And then we've got, of course, a space-themed level that's quite easy to fall off on. Wow, does that remind anyone else of Rainbow Road? Well, call this one Star Street, I don't know. Its actual name is Outer Space Chase, which is arguably even worse. And it's just a big circle, so that's great. Now, another thing to mention is, of course, this is a DS game, so it has two screens, literally called dual screen. So, what is going on the bottom screen? Well, you get a map of the race at all times, and the order of all the characters who are in the race, as well as a timer. Now, you would think that the timer would time your lap times, but it doesn't. It's the overall race. So when you hit that first lap, it just keeps going. I would have much preferred it if it had timed my laps and then reset at the end of each lap and stored them somewhere on that screen. Because at least that would have been a bit more interesting, because for 90% of these races, you're not going to be near any of the other characters, especially early game, because it's so damn easy. Yeah, there's a time trial mode, I know, but just time my laps when I'm doing the actual races as well. Most actual motorsports do that, why not do it here? Now, in terms of its visuals, this is a very simplistic looking cartoon vibe game. Now, you have to bear in mind that I have upscaled this when I'm emulating it to make it a bit better on the eyes to look at, otherwise it's really hard to see on a screen scrunched up. So obviously it's gonna look a bit better than it would on an actual DS screen. However, the character models are just quite simple, the cars themselves are okay, and the environments are actually pretty detailed for what they are. It's almost got this cel-shaded vibe to it, and I think that works with this game very well. Now, unfortunately, I cannot say the same for the sound design. The characters, thankfully, don't really say too much, because what I tend to find with these more budget kart races is if characters do have voice lines, they are repeated over and over again, and there's usually only about 3 or 4 per character. It's the same case here, but they don't really repeat them very much, and when they do speak, it's quite quiet. Now the music. The music is fine, it fits each cartoon's world, and sometimes just takes the theme song from the show, but the problem is, some of these tracks go on for like 6 or 7 minutes. Oh god, I heard what I did there. They go on for like 6 minutes, and the track goes on for like 1. So you loop through the same song 6 times, and it just gets so annoying. Some of the sound effects for the items are also stupidly loud. There's a shield power-up which puts a force field around you, and that goes on for ages, and the sound is also just completely horrible. So really the sound design is what's dragging this game down in the design side of things. Normally I find it's the other way around. Visually it's not great, sound is usually okay, but visually this game's alright and the sound is kinda ass. Now I'll be so honest, minus the wonky collision and the sometimes completely ridiculous drifting, for the most part I've actually enjoyed my time playing this game. I know I've given it some shit in this video, but it's a pretty solid looking and somewhat solid playing game with a decent lineup of tracks and a very impressive roster of characters. And on top of that, let's quickly go into the mini-games that this game also holds. Now, of course, it's a DS game, it's going to have mini-games and they're going to be touchscreen themed. So the first mini-game literally sees you drawing on outlines of cartoons, and the more accurate you are, the more score you'll get. It's as simple as that, it just gives you a bunch of outlines of cartoons and you have to draw over them. The other one, you have to curl carts on ice to get a higher score by getting it to the center of the target. Once you figure it out, it's very self-explanatory, just sometimes you have to put a lot more power into it than you might actually think. But overall, for what they are, considering they didn't need to put any minigames in the game at all, they're just nice little extras. So, in terms of its critical response, this game didn't do particularly well. It certainly didn't do terribly, but it didn't do great. The DS version of this game currently holds a 55 out of 100 on Metacritic. However, it is much better than the PlayStation 2 version with a 39 out of 100. And just for reference, the user score for this game, for the DS version, is 7.6 out of 10. So I think people look back on this one a bit more fondly than perhaps critics did at the time. And in all fairness, I can see why. It's a fairly charming, if somewhat very janky, kart racing game that wouldn't have cost too much for the DS. If you are super nostalgic for the shows that are in this game, then I can see why you would absolutely love it. Now, supposedly this game did not sell very well, having only estimated to have sold 50,000 copies, and that is per VG charts. Okay, so now the time has come to rank Cartoon Network Racing DS on our worst racing games tier list. Honestly, I don't know if I was just in a pretty good mood when I played, but I had a pretty damn good time playing it. It's janky, it's a bit awkward sometimes, but it's colourful, it's fun, the track design's pretty cool. It's pretty much just a fairly bog standard kart racer with a Cartoon Network skin on it. So for me, that means this game is going to join the likes of LA Rush in actually not that bad. And I can confirm that's definitely not nostalgia bias talking, because I didn't really get into Cartoon Network until the era of Regular Show and Adventure Time and The Amazing World of Gumball, so quite a while after these shows had already aired. When I was younger, I was more of a Nickelodeon kid. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our look at Cartoon Network Racing for the Nintendo DS, and with it, this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below, what do you think of this game? Have you played it? Are you going to go and play it now you've seen this video? And would you rank it any differently to what I did? And as always, if you have a suggestion you want to see added to the Worst Racing Games wheel, pop that down there as well. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.